And currently, I'm second year BMC student. And in this summer, I had a chance to do an internship at the NIH, the National Institute of Health in the States. I worked on 3D model creation collection, and it was to develop an open source library of 3D medical model, a set. I know that some of you already heard about it from this year AMI or previous UnCon. So today, I'd like to briefly introduce the project of the NIH and what I've learned from the internship. So the background of this project started from the existing problem in our science community. Like people in this field, researchers, educators, medical illustrators, or students, we often need 2D medical images or visual images for clear communication. But the distribution is often limited to 2D images of 3D object. And this leads to communication gaps and limits reuse of this valuable set. So NIH has been developing an open source library of 3D medical models, which is called NLM 3D Anatomy Collection. And Christine Brown, a BMC graduate, has been working on Visible Human project, which is developing all human body parts of 3D models. And I started human embryo model creation as a future collection of the open source library. So what is human embryo? I know that we all know about it, but yeah, human embryo is the early stage of human development in the first 8 weeks after fertilization. And Carnegie collection is very well characterized for showing human embryonic development. And there are 23 distinct stages in this collection. And this project, my internship, utilizes this Carnegie collection as a material. So this project uses histological sections of the Carnegie embryo. For example, stage 16 specimen was serially sectioned in transverse plane at 8 micrometers into 1,000 and 100 sections. And these are some examples of histological sections. As you see, they are stained with different chemicals. In fact, in many cases, these pathological sections were processed with different chemical at different times. So, and on top of that, since the specimens are pretty old and fragile, there are lots of distortion of anatomy, like depression of artifact or wrinkly tissue structures. So the general principle of 3D model creation is pretty much as similar as the other medical image driving 3D model creation process, but this ununified tissue processing techniques, distortion of anatomy, and lower section resolution make unique challenges in downstream reconstruction and optimization of 3D models. So I learned this workflow for 3D model creation, and each stages use different software. The first step is image registration. The histological sections were aligned using ImageJ, an open source image alignment or image processing software that was developed by NIH. As you see, they are all tilted a little bit after the alignment. And these aligned images were brought to 3D Slicer, which is another open source image segmenting software. And this is a screenshot of data segmentation in 3D Slicer. After segmenting, I got this raw 3D model, and I highlighted some examples of challenges that I mentioned. This model has a distortion, like its head is a little bit squished, and it has a deep transverse crack on its belly. Their nose and necks are often fused with their stomachs, so these features must undergo extra model reconstruction. For model reconstruction, I used the ZBrush. In ZBrush, the distortion of anatomy were fixed, and the topologies were optimized, and displacement maps were created. This is the example of raw model. The topologies of the vertices are pretty bad, and as you know, it makes the model heavy and hard to control. So after retopologization, it has a clean and nice vertices arrangement. And as we always do, I use the academic images of the embryo for structural accuracy. The final stage is rendering and refining of the model, but my internship was not really focused on this part, but I wanted to learn Maya, so Christine helped me to find some and learn Maya from the tutorial. So I had a chance to learn a basic lighting and material creation. Oops. So these are some examples of created models. I created surface anatomy models of several stages. Each model was created with high and low versions with UV coordinate displacement map. And one of the models was painted with poly painting tool in ZBrush. And the color map was used as material in Maya. As a future direction, the remaining work is completing the internal organs and surface anatomy models in all Carnegie stages. Then the model will be added to NLM3D, the open source library. The thing is that no one really knows when it's going to be released because it depends on some sort of completion of modeling, rendering, and image and model registration to the website. And that's a lot of work. This is the last slide. I made a scientific poster, which was presented in the summer poster day at the NIH. This poster is 30 by 40 inches, so it's kind of hard to see, but this poster covers pretty much everything about my internship or some sort of NLM 3D. So if you'd like to get further information, please visit my website, felixviz.com. Or if you want further information about NLM 3D specifically, you can contact Kristen Brown at the NIH. She will be more than happy to talk to you. Yeah, that's it. I hope you guys find it useful.
Any questions for Felix?
Yeah. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Gwun Chin. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So Gwun will be talking about project thinking and life optimization. Make sure that's locked on.
Did I just destroy the setup? Okay.
It's, the new Apple system's not great. This is like a dongle.
Okay, so I will not touch this. Okay. Okay, I just want to check. Can you guys hear me at the back? Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks. All right, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Guan, and I'm going to be talking about the anatomy of confidence today. And before I jump into that, I wanted to share just a little bit about myself. Who is this random guy at the front of the room presenting on confidence? Not typically something at the UnCon, I imagine. I was a graduate of the BMC program in 2010, and I worked at Invivo for a couple of years after that, doing some graphic design, development work, specifically using Unity 3D, and some user experience design as well. And I made the transition to the world of personal development, life coaching, motivational speaking, because after 2013, 2014, I was actually diagnosed with a chronic pain condition. And I've since been able to recover from that fairly well. but it was an incredibly difficult period of my life, and I got introduced to the world of personal development as a result of that. And in that world, I learned some things that essentially changed my world completely for the better. And I've now made it my mission, essentially, to share the things that I've learned through my coaching work, through my speaking work. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be able to have this opportunity to share some of that with you today. That said, let's talk about today's topic, confidence. I want to start by asking each of you, what are some areas in your life you might feel that you want more confidence in, or are actually experiencing what you would call low confidence? And just sit with that question for a bit. I won't ask you to share. But I'll invite you to keep those situations or examples in the back of your mind as I go through the presentation as a way to anchor some of the concepts and the principles that I'll be sharing with you. My intention for this talk today is to give you perhaps a different way to think about confidence and confidence development, as well as share a powerful framework that could potentially change the game for you in this department. So with that said, let's very quickly talk a bit about what confidence is. There are many different definitions out there you'll find. Here's one of them. And the preview of my actual slides is very small here, so I can barely read that. It is a feeling of self-assurance arising from one's appreciation of one's own abilities or qualities. So the important thing to know here is that confidence really does come down to a feeling, doesn't it? It's not even necessarily a permanent state. It can shift depending on the situation that you're in. For example, some of you guys came up to the front of the room to kind of share a little bit about yourself during the election process, and I imagine that felt very different for you than when you were sitting in the seats. So because of this, I'm not going to bother diving into a technical definition of confidence per se. When I talk about confidence in this presentation, I'm really just speaking about whatever confidence means for you and all of the feelings that you associate with it. To that end, I wanted to do a quick exercise with you all, just to get in touch with what that feeling is for each of you. And so I'll invite you, if you're comfortable with it, to close your eyes. It's okay if you're not. And recall a time when you felt that you were at the top of your game and feeling a true sense of confidence, whatever that means for you. And really see if you can get in touch with the feeling that you had in that situation. Words like powerful, fearless might be appropriate here. And now, recall one of the situations you noted where you were experiencing perhaps a low sense of confidence. And imagine what would be different if in that situation you could feel the exact same way you felt when you were at the top of your game, without perhaps the anxiety, the stress, the worry. And if you've opted to close your eyes, I'll invite you to open them again as we consider the question, how can you get there? So the answer is actually in changing how we perceive and experience situations. Again, how we experience a situation depends on the lens or perspective through how we view things. Now, I want to bring up an important point here. Confidence doesn't necessarily relate to competence or skill level. I'm sure you can imagine having two individuals, completely different skill levels, and having the one with the lower skill level feel just as confident as the other, or vice versa. And so how is this actually possible? It's the perspective from which each individual is seeing themselves and that situation. Example, if your boss asks you to, say, head up a new project, you may think to yourself, people are going to be judging me. What if I mess up? I don't know if I have what it takes. I might lose my credibility if I screw up. This means you're viewing the situation through a lens that's causing you to experience self-doubt. How you view a situation, yourself, your abilities, can either create a sense of confidence for you or not. So if you're feeling a lack of confidence in anywhere in your life, I would like you to consider the possibility that you can, at any moment, choose a new way of seeing things, situation, yourself, or your abilities in that situation, one that's more supportive in creating a feeling of confidence for yourself. So how does that work? Turns out there's actually a formula to explain how our perspectives affect the way that we show up in different situations. Here we see that our perspectives have an impact on the thoughts that we have about a situation. And those thoughts lead us to feel certain things in the moment or feelings about that situation, impacting the actions we either choose to take or not to take. So our perspectives, which we may not even be aware of, and our thoughts, feelings, and actions can either support us or hold us back. Let's take another example here and run it through this. Let's say you were invited to a networking event, and you were seeing the situation through a lens of, say, fear of judgment, a bit of a disempowering one, if you will. You may have thoughts like, oh boy, I don't want to go to this thing. That would mean putting myself out there. It's going to be uncomfortable. If I say something stupid, it might ruin my credibility. People are going to laugh. Why bother? I'd rather just stay at home. How do you think you would feel if you had those thoughts running through your mind? And how likely would you actually be to go to that event? If you actually went, how do you think you'd show up? Consider this alternative, perhaps more empowering way of seeing the situation. Opportunity is everywhere. Some thoughts that might accompany that perspective are, what a great chance to meet new people, to share my work, my craft, things that I love doing with others, and keep up to date on the industry. And even if it feels uncomfortable for me to go, maybe it's a great chance to practice my social skills, practice selling and presenting myself. Now, if that's truly what you thought about this particular invitation, how do you think you would feel? How much more likely would you be to actually go and show up? And if you showed up, how would that change your confidence level at the event? So how do you set yourself up for success and confidence? Start by becoming aware of the thoughts, feelings, and overall experience that is getting in the way. And then start questioning and challenging the perspectives and the beliefs that have been creating them. Then choose new ones. It's actually that simple. Let's dive even deeper into this. Turns out that there's something that changes everything when it comes to understanding how we view what shows up in our lives. And something that a lot of us are unaware of. And as the slide here says, you cannot intervene in a world that you cannot see. And so I'd like to introduce you now to the world of energy. Now, this is not to be confused with physical energy. The kind of energy that I'm talking about is experiential in nature. When we embody a certain level of energy, it affects how we see what shows up in our lives. And just a quick note here, what I'm sharing here is a framework that I learned in my coach training with IPEC coaching and my interpretation of how that model can be used to building true confidence. And so, in that model, there are two types of energy to be aware of. These are named based on the metabolic reactions you may be used to, catabolic, breaking down of molecular bonds, anabolic, building up. But don't think of them as the exact same thing. Anabolic energy, you can think of as being positive enthusiasm for life. It's a solution-focused space to come from. And when you tap into it, it creates flow. It propels us towards our goals and promotes confidence. Catabolic energy, on the other hand, you can think of as resistance to life. It's problem-focused and generates a fight-or-flight response when you use it, causing stress, anxiety, etc. The energy that we show up with affects how we view the world. Here's an analogy. You're wearing blue tinted lenses on your glasses. Of course, the entire world is going to appear blue for you. A real world example of this, let's say you view the world truly as a dog-eat-dog place, just competition everywhere. You're going to see everything as a battle, potentially a struggle, and show up accordingly. In this model, there are actually 7 perspectives each of us can view the world from. This is the energetic self-perception chart created by a gentleman by the name of Bruce Schneider showing this. It's not a cross-section of a cell. Just wanted to share that room full of medical illustrators here. But the diagram illustrates 7 levels of energy or lenses through which we can experience the world, portrayed as rings. Each level has its own core thought, feeling, and action. If I had a cursor, there we go. Yep, core thought, feeling, and action. It's probably a little bit unclear up there. I apologize for that. Another thing to note is the 2 lower levels of energy in the center are catabolic in nature and associated with stress and resistance, while the upper levels of energy are anabolic in nature and are related to power, effectiveness, and true confidence. Important note, none of us are at any given point just a single level of energy. We're always a mixture of all 7 at any given point in time. And that shifts depending on the context and the situation that we encounter. However, we truly have, for the most part, one predominant energy that likes to lead in both kind of our regular status quo day-to-day experiences and when we're in stress response. So I'm going to briefly describe what each level is all about, and I'll invite you to consider and think about where each level of energy shows up in your life. I'll start with levels 1 and 2, the levels of catabolic energy. The first level is the level of the victim. And a lot of people get kind of a bit triggered by the word victim. All I mean when I say that word is someone who feels that they are at the effect of the situation or what's showing up there, and thus are feeling like there's a barrier to them feeling successful and feeling confident. Someone that feels that they are at the effect of something. So here, the level 1 core thought is feeling at the effect, leading to a feeling of apathy. And the action is lethargy, very low engagement in whatever it is that's in front of you. The experience at level 1 is one of fear, worry, self-doubt, low confidence, hopelessness, indecisiveness, low engagement. And most situations, not most, all predominantly, are seen through the mindset of I lose, so why bother? Level 1 feels pretty crappy, let's say, and promotes a low level of confidence. The second level is the perspective of the fighter. Now, here we've got the core thought of conflict, leading to a feeling of anger, and ultimately an action of defiance, potentially. The experience here is very filled with struggle, resistance, frustration. Everything is seen as black or white, so good, bad, right or wrong. It's a very judgmental way of seeing the world. And predominantly, the way this shows up in situations is the mentality, I win, you lose. What's interesting about level 2 is that this is actually the predominant energy in the workplace and in life in general. As you can imagine, most individuals, when they show up in a situation, are really just looking to make a win for themselves. Level 2 can look really confident on the surface, standing up and fighting for yourself again. And in that way, it can be a good place to start building confidence, but it's not sustainable. You can start getting into action by tapping into level 2 for sure, but because everything is seen as a constant struggle, a battle, a lot of personal development has this hustle hard, motivational kind of energy behind it. It's actually not sustainable because it's going to create constant stress leading to burnout. Let's talk about some more effective ways of viewing the world potentially, and talk about the anabolic levels starting with level 3. So this is the first anabolic level we've got. The core thought here is taking responsibility for your own experience, leading to a feeling of forgiveness and an action of cooperation. The overall experience at level 3 is, again, taking responsibility for what's showing up in your life. Thoughts, feelings, etc. There's rationalization happening here, so we're explaining to ourselves and convincing ourselves why things are the way that they are in order to let go, tolerate, compromise, get to a place of good enough. A lot of positive thinking falls into this category. And in situations, the mindset is, I win, but it's fine if you win too. And so here at level 3, we're actually starting to consider others outside of ourselves. But first and foremost, to fulfill our agenda before that. And so at level 3, it's interesting because even though your immediate response to a situation may not feel incredibly confident, you're able to rationalize and convince yourself to take right action despite that. And in so doing, generally experience perhaps less resistance than you would at lower levels. Level 4 energy is the perspective of the caregiver. And so here, we're seeing the world through the thought of concern for others, leading to compassion and ultimately service, taking care of others. It's about them, first and foremost. The experience is one of giving, supporting, helping. Selflessness comes into play here. And we start taking things less personally because, again, we're less focused on ourselves. We're looking at the other individual or the group of the people around us. And the mindset here in any situation is you win, others first. Confidence is higher here because, again, we've set aside the ego now and are thinking beyond just ourselves. Level 5 is the perspective of the opportunist. This is a very high anabolic level. We've got a core thought of reconciliation leading to peace and the action of acceptance. Here's where good or bad, right or wrong, all just come together. We start seeing opportunities in everything that shows up and embrace differences and unexpected outcomes. It's all opportunity for us, which makes us incredibly passionate. The approach in any situation here is a win-win approach. We all win or we don't play at all. When you can tap into this level, your confidence skyrockets because even things that most individuals would be uncomfortable with, like failure, judgment from others, they actually become opportunities that we get excited about. So the highest 2 levels, levels 6 and 7, in terms of anabolic energy, are next. We've got level 6 here, the perspective of the visionary. Now, this is where we have a core thought of synthesis. So we see the bigger picture instead of just the individual parts. And in so doing, feel a deep sense of connection between everything in the system or the world or the universe, however you're looking at it, leading to a feeling of joy and wisdom. So here again, seeing the whole instead of just the parts, this is where intuition and creativity come alive. And we sense a deep connection with everyone and everything at this level. The experience is the opportunity here. And every situation is approached with the mindset, everyone always wins. There's no such thing as losing in any situation anymore. This is an incredibly confident place to come from. For instance, if I truly believe that there is no separation between us, I see myself in each and every person that I meet, there is no fear of judgment anymore. How could there be? Because we're all the same. There's a deep level of understanding and wisdom in seeing situations from that place. At level 6, you're also seeing the bigger picture, and so tiny bumps along the way are embraced because there's an understanding now that they're simply a part of life's grand adventure. Finally, we've got level 7, the perspective of the creator. This is the highest anabolic level and is characterized by the thought non-judgment, feeling, absolute passion, action, creation. So the experience here is governed by completely objective thinking, leading to fearlessness. Nothing is judged one way or the other, so there's no perceived quote-unquote threats here. This idea of being instead of doing. We approach every situation through unconditional love with the mindset that winning and losing are simply illusions. They don't actually exist. They're just constructs that we've kind of created around this game that we call life. But everything in reality just is. And so there's an understanding of that there. So at this level, there is no experience other than pure confidence because fear doesn't exist. And at level 7, you can tap into any of the lower levels at will. And so that was a quick rundown of the 7 levels of energy. And I'd like to take you through an example and illustrate how these might come into play. Let's say that you were invited to pitch work to a potential client. And so we'll explore how each energy level might respond to this situation. At level 1, you might be thinking, why bother? They're not going to like my ideas anyway. I don't want to risk looking stupid. So feeling that you are at the effect of the situation. Level 2, okay, bring it. I'm going to show everyone what I've got by landing that client. There's a bit of fighter there to it. Level 3, is this actually a client that I would like to work with? Rationalizer. Level 4, awesome. I can't wait to see how it can help them with their business goals. Caregiver, thinking about others first. Level 5, what an amazing opportunity to get work, to meet incredible people, and to gain valuable experience in selling my services. Opportunist. At level 6, man, I love what I do. New adventures to experience every day in life. Level of the visionary. And at level 7, interesting, because you just see it as this arbitrary interaction between humans. And you can then choose consciously what level you would like to, like 1 through 6, how you would like to proceed in that situation. And so that's an example of the 7 levels kind of applied in a particular situation. I'd like you now to think back and consider those examples you thought of where you were perhaps experiencing low confidence, maybe a bit of anxiety around, stress perhaps. And think about which level of energy was showing up for you in those moments. And chances are, it's probably one of the lower, more catabolic levels of energy. But now you know. If you want to have a different experience in any given situation, you can shift your energy. Choose a new way to see yourself, the situation, your abilities in that situation. And as Wayne Dyer here brilliantly puts it, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And of course, easier said than done, right? This takes practice. You're building a new skill, a muscle, like anything else, it takes time. But if you think about it, and this is my opinion, what better skill to work on and develop than in mastering how you experience your life? And so, just to keep an eye on the time here, this slide just shows that there is an assessment that actually quantifies one's energetic makeup that I actually do with clients. And just to share that this isn't an arbitrary concept. We can actually put numbers to this. And we've been talking about confidence here for the most part, but know that studies have shown that higher levels of energy are actually associated with higher levels of life satisfaction in general. And so this is why when we coach, we look to shifting someone's energy. And so I hope this framework has kind of provided you a different way to think about confidence and developing confidence. And quick summary here, confidence is a feeling. Our perspectives influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions in any given situation. And in any moment, if you want to change your experience, just shift your energy, change how you see that situation. And what's really cool is that you can't unsee this presentation. And so the next time you're going into a situation where you're feeling a little bit of low confidence, maybe getting a little anxious, just stop. Just breathe and know that you can take responsibility for how you're showing up and shift your energy. And so, hope you enjoyed this. This was all a small peek into the world of the work that I typically do with clients on a regular basis. But if you take what's here and you run with it, like for real, this could change the game for you and put you in a great position to become your most confident self and start to create a very powerful life, the one that you really are looking to experience here and now. Thank you. I wanted to thank the BMCA for having me do a talk that's a little bit unconventional, I imagine, and especially give a shout out to Paul because he reached out and he invited me to do something again that's probably a bit off menu, and I appreciate having that opportunity. Thank you, man.
Next up, we have Dave. He needs no introduction. He does need a presentation. I do. This, I know. This one? Folder's made. I just finished. Server stream. What's this guy?
I can't find it. I can't find it. This is my fifth UnCon. And just like these, it's going to be what my dad would refer to as a frivial, a word he made up that combines trivial and frivolous. It's actually also a good topic for the UnCon because it's an unconnected series of events that I've somehow turned into an unlikely hypothesis. So it's very So last fall, Shelley spotted this conference online that was going to take place in Oxford in May. And I thought, this is great. This is my two favorite things, the human body and World War II. So I thought, I have to submit I'll submit an abstract. So it was in Oxford, which was beautiful if you've been to Oxford. It was in the least Oxfordian building that you could imagine. Could be Scarborough. But it's the Faculty of English. So it was a lot of literary content, the body and literature from around the war. And I was going to talk about, as you know, the history of Grant and Pernkopf, something that you've all heard about in talks that we've given at in BMC, because it was they were people in literature and people in the humanities. I wasn't sure how they would react to some of the imagery. So of course these are the two books, and obviously the Second World War is very important in the genesis of those books. So I wanted to warn them there was going to be some imagery that they might not be used to seeing if they hadn't studied anatomy or anything. They took pictures at the conference. I'm the only ones I'm ever in is where it's the back of my head. So that's me. And what am I doing? I'm going to buy some books. I also took the opportunity, since it was about World War II, I made a pilgrimage to the Bovington Tank Museum in Sussex. This is I've got lots of slides, which will be part of another talk that absolutely no one wants to see. This is a Tiger I. This is the only running Tiger tank in existence, captured in North Africa. Like I said, no one. So anyway, those of you who mostly are familiar with the story of Grant and Pernkopf. They were both born around the same time period, had similar early life stories, became physicians, served in the military in the First World War for their respective countries, and in the 1930s began the genesis of the two anatomical works that sort of define their careers. Of course, Grant's Atlas, produced at the University of Toronto, still in print today. Pernkopf's Atlas, not around anymore because he was a Nazi, and there are some issues around that. So again, looking at it, both of these guys, these very brilliant anatomists, came up with the idea for the same kind of book at around the same time. Pernkopf started a little earlier. Grant began his work during the Second World War when books were unavailable from Europe. So it led me to think, well, that's interesting that they both had the same idea at the same time. And there is a phenomenon that is documented in many places called simultaneous discovery or simultaneous invention, where there have been occurrences in history where two different people kind of came up with an important idea or concept more or less at the same time. Usually one person gets the credit. So most people think of Isaac Newton inventing calculus, but if there was a German philosopher thinking about the same issues, and the same with evolution, we kind of credit Darwin, but a friend, Alfred Russel Wallace, also had similar ideas at the same time. So it's the shortest possible solution to that question is, yeah, these guys came up with the same idea at the same time for a different paradigm for describing anatomy and created their own books. But as I was looking into this and thinking, could there have been a connection? And then I did discover that there was, in fact, someone who knew them both and had attended conferences with both of them and may or may not have been an intellectual connection between the two of them. And his name is Charles Clifford Macklin. So if in terms of a Venn diagram, and I just realized it looks like Mickey Mouse, but what I was hoping to do is kind of connect these two authors with the idea of this book. And Macklin was going to be the person that was going to connect them in some way. So I needed to learn more about this guy that I learned as I was doing some research into this subject. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole now and see what I found. Oh, wrong rabbit hole. Sorry. Okay. So first a little bit about Charles Clifford Macklin, C.C. Macklin. He was born in Scarborough. He went to the Toronto Business School and was working at one of the life insurance companies downtown, and one of his supervisors kind of saw that he was a little too smart just to be doing actuarial stuff, as a career, and said, why don't you look into going into medicine? I guess it was that easy back then. Okay, so he went to U of T. That's his graduation photo, which is on the hallway in the Faculty of Medicine. He was a very bright student. He wrote a paper on the development of the fetal skull that won him the James Richardson Fellowship Award. He became an MD and then joined the American Anatomical Association. So that's an association that's going to come up again. He then went on to do a PhD at Johns Hopkins, which is where he met his wife, who was also becoming an MD. Her name was Madge Thurlow. So we'll come back to her too. She's part of the story, maybe not quite part of the story that I thought. And then he took a job. He was looking for a job, and he got one at the Western University, which is now University of Western Ontario, where he started to do research into the anatomy and physiology of the lung. He wasn't really happy there. Western at the time was not a university held in high regard, and he spent a lot of time trying to find another job somewhere else. I found letters that he had written constantly to his former supervisor at Hopkins, asking him if he could, if he heard of anything. He contemplated taking a job in Thailand at one point, although he knew it probably wouldn't work out. But he was kind of desperate to get out of Western. In 1946, he resigned as the chair of anatomy. He had been promoted. And then retired completely in 1953. And at Western, you weren't allowed to continue to use the facilities once you had retired. So he tried to continue some of his research here at U of T, but without really much success or support. So he became kind of dispirited later in life and It's recorded that he died of a heart attack on a bus going to pay his utility bill at some point. It's kind of a sad ending. And we know a lot about him, or I know a lot about him, mostly through the work of this guy, totally unconnected to the story. But Norman Staub was an American physician whose specialty was also the anatomy and physiology of the lung. And he had read all of Macklin's papers and was really kind of surprised that Macklin in his lifetime was not really given much credit for the work that he had done. Other researchers in Europe cited Macklin's papers constantly, but in North America and in Canada, he's relatively unknown for his contributions to our understanding of the physiology of the lung. So I think he was kind of fixated on him and maybe kind of sad, when he realized that not only was he underappreciated, but at the end of his life, his wife was working in another country and they didn't spend time together, and he just died in a bus. So he took it upon himself to promote Macklin's name and his research. And he wrote many papers about Macklin's life that were published in a number of scientific journals, in appreciation of the career of Charles Macklin. He was also working on a book, but he died before he finished his book. So his wife in California, because Macklin was at Western, donated 5 banker's boxes of his research to Western. Including all kinds of things. He actually came to Toronto a few times and made recordings of interviews with Macklin's surviving children and other family. Some of the tapes have been transcribed, some of them not. This was like, man talking, what is it? I don't know. I didn't listen to the tapes. But he had all the correspondence that he had with other academics trying to learn about Macklin's life. Collections of things from Macklin's own archives. His kids gave him a lot of stuff that he had left them that they didn't know what to do with. Newspaper clippings about his travels and academic accomplishments. Photographs of his things. Trivial things that he had collected throughout his life, memorabilia and things, as well as a draft manuscript of the book that he had written, with this, still being edited and annotated, that he, again, unfortunately didn't finish. So I had to spend a day out there at the beginning of June and went through all this stuff. And to see if I could find a connection, anything in writing that would connect Macklin to Grant and Pernkopf. So I didn't really find anything. Well, I found a few little things. But anyway, this was one of the papers that Staub wrote about Macklin. It's the first paper that I found. When I Googled Macklin, this came up as a piece of literature. And, a lot of what I've just told you about his life is in there. But then there was this paragraph here. In 1945, Macklin was devastated when the university administration abruptly terminated his wife's teaching position. So she traveled with him to Western. She was an American, and was a sessional instructor. She didn't get a full-time position. But they canceled her contract in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. Apparently, Madge Macklin, who was well known in the field of human genetics, had offended important citizens and alumni with her view on eugenics. So I don't know if that word means anything to you, or what you understand eugenics to be. And you don't hear it talked about very much, because it is a philosophy that has been discredited. The word eugenics was coined by Francis Galton, who was actually a nephew of Darwin. And he had studied the British elite and determined that they were the best, they were the cream of the crop because they were genetically superior. So he came up with a kind of a process where we could improve the race or the breeding of animals and then people by selectively controlling that. And of course, we do that all the time with plants and animals. We breed animals to be better food, or give more milk, or better plants for better yields, and so on. But he wanted to apply this, or his idea was we could apply that to the human race. We could improve our own race by weeding out the unfit, the imbeciles, the morons, the alcoholics, the morally infirm, by sterilization, segregation, birth control, and so on. And if you know the word at all, you may have already associated that with the Nazi regime. That was a keystone of their social program, to remove what they deemed to be the undesirable elements of society, which ended up as being part of the Holocaust as well. This is literature from before the war in the 1930s. So because of what the Nazis did and what they did with that kind of expression, eugenics, though that word is now really kind of in disrepute. We still kind of look at genetics as a genetic screening for hereditary conditions and so on. But the Nazis took it to its illogical and extremely cruel extreme. Now, if you're thinking, well, that's, of course, those are the Nazis. Eugenics was a hugely important movement in North America, including Canada, in the 1930s. It was viewed as a valid way of improving society. In fact, the Germans learned from the eugenics policies instituted in North America. British Columbia and Alberta actually had compulsory sterilization laws, and they were only repealed in 1973. And there were still people being sterilized in the 1970s in Western Canada. So we shouldn't be too smug. So anyway, so Madge Thurlow Macklin, she's kind of revered in some ways because she's the person who advocated the teaching of genetics in medical schools. She was one of the first people to understand that certain diseases that physicians were trying to learn about and treat could not be treated in conventional ways. They were transmitted genetically, and we had to look at genetics to understand them, and therefore we should teach genetics in medical schools. At the same time, she was a proponent of eugenics. She helped to form the Eugenics Society of Canada. So I thought, well, this is tying her to the Nazi philosophy in some way. Not directly, perhaps. And I learned a lot about this by reading this book by a Canadian historian, Angus McLaren, called Our Own Master Race, about the whole history of eugenics. I thought, oh, great, now I got to read this. So I get this book out, and halfway through it, again, I'm not even interested in eugenics so much. I'm just trying to find out about, Grant. This is sort of peripheral. But I find this. Okay, and another attempt to create a Canadian Eugenics Society took place in the late 1920s when the leader of the American group contacted C.C. Macklin to start a sister organization in Canada. And he wrote a letter to 4 academics in Western Canada. And one of them was JCB Grant. So, damn, now I know that Macklin and Grant had communicated, maybe more. I would have assumed more. They were both anatomists. They were both in Ontario working at universities. But now I've got this. And I found the letter that Grant wrote back to Macklin where he said, no, it's not, I'm not going to, I was curious, did he say I'm not interested because I think that's a terrible idea? Or that's a great idea, but I'm a little too busy. I mean, we don't want to paint Grant in any negative terms. And in fact, Staub really ignores this whole thing in all of his other writings, except for that one little sentence that I found in that one article. So anyway, so Grant wrote back to say, it's not really something I know about. I'm not prepared to do it, but thanks for asking. He also then recommended a couple of botanists, which again is interesting. It's like, yeah, plants, it's okay. Eugenics with plants, fine. But the thing that got me was my dear Macklin. So that's not an honorific that you would use if you're professionally distant from somebody. So it seemed to me that they knew each other. And in fact, there were other contacts that they had. And I don't think Macklin himself, even though his wife was a eugenicist, I don't think he embraced it. I think he looked at that as an opportunity maybe for advancement, to try to organize something. Because when Grant and the other 3 people he wrote to said, no, we're not interested, he said, I'm not the guy to do it. And of course, it ended up being his wife instead. This is a really funny article that I found in the Toronto Star from January 1933. Again, it's a funny thing. I don't think you'd see an article like this in the paper today. 2 doctors disagree in their own house on the problem of eugenics, where Macklin himself says, my problems are in a different field. I don't really see how that works. The trains don't run on time. Do we blame the engineers or the guys that design the trains? So he seemed to be kind of distancing himself from it. So I don't think he was a eugenicist. But in any case, we've now established that Grant and Macklin had communicated with one another. So in fact, one of the things that Macklin did after he graduated was join the American Anatomical Association. And when Grant came to Canada in 1919, that's one of the first things that he did as well. So they were both members of this professional organization for a number of years and would have known of each other. And in fact, later in life, they did actually collaborate on one paper and presented at a couple of different conferences. I'm still just kind of interested in the 1920s and 30s when the genesis of this book came about. So now I've connected Macklin to Grant and a bunch of other things that aren't really that crucial, but just kind of weird, like a red herring, a kind of a, look over there, okay, kind of. So Madge, eugenics, and NSDAP, which is the German acronym for the National Socialist Party, or the Nazis. So that's, I think, how those kind of overlap. And it doesn't look like Mickey Mouse anymore. Okay, so now I have to connect them to Pernkopf. How do I do that? we know a lot about what Pernkopf was up to and what the Nazi medical regime was up to. And we know about Pernkopf primarily because of David Williams, a member of the Association of Medical Illustrators, who wrote probably one of the most important papers ever written for the Journal of Biocommunication, which was his history of the Pernkopf Atlas. David was incredibly impressed by the Pernkopf book as a student and wanted to know more. So he actually went to Austria in 1979. He took a sabbatical and spent a lot of time with Franz Bottke to learn about Pernkopf and about how those drawings were made. Bottke actually showed him the techniques that they used to create those illustrations. And so in talking to Bottke, he learned all about what really went on, and there are all the biographies and the connections of Pernkopf and his artists to the Nazi Party. And this article then got a lot of people wanting to know more. And it kind of began, it was part of the beginning of Europeans themselves kind of reflecting on what happened during the war. Because a lot of that stuff got covered up. They didn't want to talk about it, especially in institutions. A lot of people went to jail, but not the people that were teaching and working in universities for the most part. So Sabine Hildebrand is one of the academics who's been writing a lot about the Pernkopf atlases, as well as medicine in the Nazi era. She's written many, many papers. And then took a lot of that research and put them in an entire book, which is an incredibly depressing read called The Anatomy of Murder, Ethical Transgressions in Anatomical Science During the Third Reich. So I'm starting to read that book, and it's super well documented. She's an incredible researcher. The footnotes have footnotes. And I'm reading, and I find some references written by another academic in Berlin named Andreas Winkelmann. So I get in touch with him, and I get a couple of his articles. And he's been doing research into the archives of the secretary of a German anatomical association called the Anatomische Gesellschaft. Apparently this secretary, again, stereotypical German, very thorough, lots of written records, everything documented, lists, names, the whole thing. And I'm reading this paper, and I discover that the Anatomische Gesellschaft is not just a European group, it's an international body. I thought, well, okay, well, that's interesting. So I write to him, and I said, you're looking through the records that the secretary left behind. Were there any Canadians in the group? I don't know. And he says, oh, yeah, there were a couple. And there's Charles Clifford Macklin. So I ask him to send me some more documents, and he sends me this stuff in German, which of course I can't read. He was gracious enough to translate just the things that he thought I would be interested in. So these are the minutes of the Anatomische Gesellschaft documenting a meeting that took place in Milan. It says that somewhere. Of course, this is going to beep because for some reason the laser makes the sound beep. I don't know why it does that. There was an international meeting in Milan in 1936, the fourth international meeting of the International Anatomists Association. And who presented at that meeting? Well, two people that we're interested in. Macklin gave a talk at this conference, and not the same day or in the same session, but Pernkopf also gave a talk. So now I put Pernkopf and Macklin together. They were at a conference together. Now, I don't know if Macklin spoke German. I don't think Pernkopf spoke English. I have no idea if they spoke to one another, but I can put them in the same room or in the same city. Shortly afterward, Macklin joined the Anatomische Gesellschaft. So this is the official notification of new members. And there's Macklin. This is accepted 16th of November, 1936. In 1937, Macklin was very busy. The American Association of Anatomists had their conference in Toronto. So both Macklin, his wife, and Grant all presented papers at that conference. That is the Toronto skyline from 1938. After this conference, Macklin then traveled with his wife and their oldest daughter to Europe. Macklin gave a paper at a conference in Belfast. His wife also spoke there, not about eugenics, about her other research related to cancer. And from there, Macklin went to the meeting of the Anatomische Gesellschaft in Königsberg. Pernkopf was not at the meeting, and he's not in the picture. So this is the secretary, von Egling, the guy who's making all the great notes. Hans Virchow, an anatomist, the son of Rudolf Virchow. Hermann Stieve is an important anatomist from Berlin. This is Nazi official. And there's our friend Macklin. There he is in the same white suit we saw him in the previous photograph. If you look closely, you can see all the guys have these little dots, these little circles, these little dots on their lapels. You see how many of them? Those are National Socialist Party pins. Well, anyway, so I put these guys together. This is a postcard that the secretary, von Eggeling, had sent Macklin at the end of that year, from December 1937. And this was in Macklin's collection at Western. And I had it translated by a German speaker out at UTM. And it's basically, Macklin, I think, in context, it sounds like Macklin had offered the Anatomische Gesellschaft his papers, a collection of his research. And von Eggeling's writing back saying, oh, well, thanks very much. We don't really have a headquarters or place to store it. So, don't send us all your stuff because we don't know what to do with it. So he continued to be in touch with them. And then, of course, shortly after the war started. And that's pretty much where the story ends for me, because now the books were underway. Pernkopf was already working on his atlas, and Grant, of course, started during the war, so there would be no more communicating about that. So anything that Grant and Macklin did after the war is not really that relevant. So I've got them all together. I've managed to put Macklin between the two of them, and they must have known about each other. And unfortunately, that's where it ends, because I have not found anything in writing that connects those stories. I was really hoping to find something. Grant has no records. The UT archives are there's like 3 pieces of paper and a bowling trophy or something. It's like there's nothing there. Probably destroyed when they moved from the old medical sciences building to the new MSB. They probably just cleared out his office, which is the bane of archivists everywhere. So try as I might to find anything that would connect them personally, some exchange of words, some documents, some letters. Unfortunately, I can't make that connection. This is in a fever dream. This is what I imagined I might find. So that's pretty much the. I'll let you finish reading. Anyway, so this is the end of the talk. This is where I end because that's as much as I can learn. So whether or not Macklin was there or not, probably not. I think it's just a coincidence, and I just followed this as far as I could go. And unless I learn German or see if I can find records that Pernkopf might have left, that's where it ends. So it's a mystery. Maybe Macklin was there, maybe he wasn't. So all I can say is thanks.
Entertaining as always.